that's true. Naked Palpatine.
Oh, you pick that one. Fresh out of the clone tank, nude Palpatine is my
Well, that's the first thing I think of when you say Dark Empire Palpatine.
Hello guys, welcome to my thoughts, my review on Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. Yes, I do have a Penguins classic. Feels nice to have. Sucks I got a little bit of, little crinkles, I don't know if you can tell, but, that's what happens when you have a, not a hardback. But it means it's been worn, torn, and used, so it's good. Pride and Prejudice. I'm fairly certain I either read this growing up or at least watched a movie. And as a kid, I was very much like, oh, girly, But this is so much more than just a romance novel. I mean, it's a social commentary at the time, which, this came out in 13? This was, I've talked about Wuthering Heights on this channel. I've talked about Jane Eyre, and I plan on talking about the Tenets of Whirlpool Hall, the Anne Bronte novel. But these are all like the 1840s, right? These are all later, in the 1800s. This is 1813. This is even earlier. Like, the Bronte sisters read Jane Austen. Jane Austen is one of the greatest writers of all time. People know this. I mean, when you hear about the greatest writers of all time, who are some of the people you hear, right? You hear about, Shakespeare, Cervantes, Dickens, Jane Austen. These are names that are big names. Now, reading this as an adult, I can definitely appreciate a lot more than I would have as a kid. Do I love this novel? Is it even close to one of my favorite novels of all time? For me, no. And there's nothing explicitly wrong with it. I do think, for how short this book is, it's still a little bit, just a little bit, overstays its welcome. I feel like there's a lot of... dialogue is good. I freaking love dialogue when I read a book. I live for dialogue. But I also feel like there's a lot of just needless exposition sometimes in here. I think this book does an expert job at showing, because at the same time when you pick up a book like this, you kind of feel like you kind of need a history lesson, because this is set during the Regency era. So a lot of it is like with women not having equal rights at this time, but there's also right now a burgeoning of a different thought process on that right now in this time period. Jane Austen, of course, is a very strong contender for that. But women, they don't really work that often. They don't tend to. And so the father of these 5 daughters, he's had 5 daughters and no sons. So all of his inheritance, once he finally passes away, must go to his closest male relative, which is a cousin of theirs, distantly related. And so what the daughters will get once he passes away is not going to be much. Like, it's probably the equivalent of a couple $1,000s in our today's time, which is nothing for surviving. So really, they need to find a husband who can provide for them, essentially, since they're not allowed to work. That is really the only way they're going to remain okay moving forward. And so a lot of this novel is balls and walking around and talking with guys and this and that, because a lot of these women are trying to find themselves a husband. Of course, our main character, Elizabeth, is not quite the same as that. She would rather, struggle and not be doing well off than choose a husband who's going to be annoying to her to a large extent. And while this book may also be about romance, it is also a very funny novel. like I said, very big on the social commentary. I also think Jane Austen has some wonderful prose, not particularly prose that really strike me, or really make me like stop and just admire, like you may do with like a Shakespeare, or if you want to jump to fantasy when you read like something from Stephen Erickson, and that makes you just go like, wow. There are moments like that in the book that I appreciate, but it's mostly just a consistent through line, a consistent beat of consistent quality that I appreciate about Jane Austen. Ultimately, Elizabeth, man, there's always something that has to happen when I try to do a freaking video in this new place every single time. But so essentially, there's this ball, and all the sisters are there, right? And Elizabeth happens upon Mr. Darcy, who seems very rude and arrogant and all this other things. And her pride is hurt at that, and they have a lot of fun bickering and bantering. A lot of things you'll notice about Pride and Prejudice is if you ever have the enemies to lovers trope in any sort of fiction, whether that be sci-fi or fantasy or contemporary stuff, any movie, TV show, novel, video game, anything in any way, shape, or form, if you play today, if you read or watch today, that has an enemies to lovers sort of dynamic, you have Jane Austen to thank for it, because it started here. I mean, I don't even think Shakespeare ever did anything quite like that. So really, it is Jane Austen you have to thank for that. Sure, she probably wasn't absolutely, positively the first person ever to do it, but in terms of large popularity, it was Jane Austen. Like I said, while the romance may not be the core of it, it is not the core of the story. In fact, it is rather... Jane Austen isn't very flowery with her prose or making it be super romantic. Like, actually, in the future of the Bronte sisters, they're far more romantic when it comes not only to relationships in general and making that a little bit more melodramatic, but just the setting, evoking that, you know, the atmosphere. There's a lot more... what's the word? There's a lot more attention given to those things. It's actually fairly flat in terms of setting and stuff. Like, there's only a few times Jane Austen goes into detail about setting, and like the place that Darcy's staying at explicitly gets that mention, because it talks about how it's like kind of, you know, like big but cold and empty sort of, you know, sort of vibe, because it's sort of like a mirror of Mr. Darcy himself, or how she views Mr. Darcy to be. And so you get a lot of that. But also, like, in terms of clothing and stuff, you're not getting like Robert Jordan, who would do the exact opposite of what she's doing, which would go into extreme and utter detail about the clothes that these people are wearing. Jane Austen doesn't care to tell you that. Just guess. Use your imagination. I'm not telling you what they're wearing. She also doesn't really go into extreme detail about what these people look like. So you've either seen an adaptation of this book and have an idea in your mind of what these people look like, or you just make it up. Really. Of course, I see Keira Knightley because I grew up with Pirates of the Caribbean and the 2005 Pride and Prejudice. So yes, I do see Keira Knightley. I mean, who wouldn't want to see Keira Knightley? Woman still looks phenomenal. She's like my mother's age. Anyway, that's a different thing. But the romance itself, despite not being the absolute focus of it, I still think works very well. You know, I grew up as a child falling in love with the really cheesy shit, man. Apologize for the cussing. I grew up with, you know, I was forced to watch Grease growing up with my parents. Much the same way that if anybody's a parent that's my age now, because time is awful, there's a 20-year, a little tangent, 20-year gap between Grease and when I was a little kid growing up, right? But now, if somebody my age, 25, around the 20s spot, and they have a kid already, which I don't have a kid, which is just crazy to think about. But if somebody has a kid right now, and they go and put on High School Musical, that is the same gap for that child now as Grease was for me growing up. Or how about this? Listening to Michael Jackson music right now is the equivalent of listening to 1930s music in the 80s. Let that sink in. Anyway, I grew up with High School Musical. Very romantic, very much cheesy like that. Um, or Camp Rock, um, Romeo and Juliet, um, all that stuff. So I have always been a softie. I used to be a hopeless romantic and always hoping for true love and everything that the movies promised you that doesn't exist. It exists. It doesn't exist for everyone, I should say. And I've become a bit more realistic in my older age. But I can't lie. It's still the chemistry between Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy is Elizabeth Bennet is super. It's fun to see them banter. Always love good banter between like a couple. It's always fun to watch. And while they're not a couple for the majority of this novel, it still is. It's fun to see. Um, and Yeah, I mean, I love most of the characters. Like even Mr. Collins, I think is really funny. I think he's a really funny character. I can't even hate the guy. He's just kind of silly and pathetic. Um, but I also love Mr. Bennett. I think he's a maybe not a perfect father, but um, he's really endearing. I think because he married his wife because she looks real good. At least to him. At least to him, she does. And so they have a lot of clashing views on certain things, but they never like argue or seem angry at each other, which I also appreciate. Um, just kind of like whatever. Um, I think one of my favorite moments from Mr. Bennett is her mother tries to go to Elizabeth and say like, "You need to marry Mr. Collins, or I'm never talking to you again." And Mr. Bennett's like, "Well, yeah, you have a choice to make here. You either, you know, don't marry Mr. Collins and, never talk to your mother again, or you marry Mr. Collins and you never talk to me again." And I love that. But by and large, it's a good little tale. What I do appreciate about some of the movies, sure they don't keep everything that is important about this book. I think the 2005 one, for whatever it doesn't do that the book does, it retains the spirit and the atmosphere and what it feels like to read the book more so than the actual contents of the book. But I also feel personally, and listen, this may be blasphemy to say to the Austenites or whatever the hell they're called. And I mean, I plan on reading every Jane Austen work, don't freak out at me. And I enjoyed this, but I do think sometimes an abridged version may be a better version. And, I enjoyed my time with this book. But, as a softie as I am, yes, I then watched the 2005 film. And yes, I plan on watching the miniseries with Colin Firth. Don't you worry. But I'll tell you, I did have a more, subjective, enjoyable time watching the 2005 film than reading the book. That being said, I did enjoy my time with the book. I wrote down certain passages, which I will probably show in spoilers. But by and large, again, and I say this every time I talk about, like, especially, like, a revered classic of fiction of all time, like, I'm an idiot. Like, I have nothing to add here that people have been saying for the past, like, 4 decades and onward. Like, I have nothing that I can contribute that will add to the conversation here other than, yes, I enjoyed it. It is a classic for a reason. I'm not just glazing the book because it's a classic. If I didn't enjoy it, I would tell you. But no, yes, this is a book you should check out. You should at least read it once. It may not be your favorite work of all time. It will help you appreciate other stories more. And you know what? It is just a good story. Do I have my gripes with it? Do I wish it kind of like shaved off a little bit of this book that I feel was unnecessary? Yes. But it's still a good book. I enjoyed my time with it. I enjoyed it. And I want to read the rest of Jane Austen's work, I want to read Persuasion. I want to read Sense and Sensibility and Emma. I've watched Clueless, which is an adaptation of Emma, but I want to read the proper story. Clueless is a good movie though. And Northanger Abbey, I already knew about that, by the way, because I've been trying to work in works of Gothic literature, and Northanger Abbey is a big, like, love letter to Gothic literature, because she wrote that later in her life, um, while other people were writing their Gothic works. I mean, Gothic works were already coming out around this time and before. I mean, I talked about Lord Byron and stuff like that. But the point is, I know about that book, and that's also coming down the pipeline eventually, probably after I've read every other Jane Austen novel. Well, there goes the train. But I'm going to get into some spoilers. If you don't want any spoilers, there's a door. It's a good book, though, worth your time. Please go check out. Till then. Alrighty. We got Lizzie, or Elizabeth, but they call her Lizzie for short. We have Cydia and Jane, who is the best Bennet child, for the most part. Jane Austen, I think it's a little funny. I think Jane's biggest flaw in the whole novel is that she's far too trusting, and even when she realizes that she probably shouldn't be, she would still rather believe in the good in people, which is not the worst thing. I mean, I'm sure Superman would be a big fan, so I cannot hate her for that. But by and large, she's a pretty good person with not too many negatives. But yeah, Mrs. Bennet's main drive throughout this film, or throughout the book, is for her children to be married. Mr. Bingley is a suitor. Mr. Bingley is the main guy that is, looking for someone, and his best friend is Mr. Darcy. So that's how that all happens. There's a character named Mr. Hurst, and Mr. Bingley is a brother-in-law. Mr. Darcy is a friend. Darcy's attitude on the surface, proud and unlikable, but so is Jane Austen. She's also proud and full of prejudice. The big thing throughout this book, too, this is not like a Beauty and the Beast scenario. This is not Elizabeth Bennet fixing Mr. Darcy, making him a better person. He does, in a sense, get a little bit better the more he gets infatuated with her, but it is not about fixing anybody per se. There is a little bit of rudeness. They both got off on the wrong start, but ultimately there was a lot of preconceived notions Mr. Darcy had about Elizabeth, and there was a lot of preconceived notions that Elizabeth had about Mr. Darcy, and they were both wrong to an extent about one another. So that's the big thing. Like, Mr. Darcy is actually a pretty good guy. He's actually a pretty nice guy to those he cares about. He just doesn't care about having to show that to everyone he doesn't know. Like, he just doesn't. Which is, I think, a little bit admirable. Elizabeth is also very observant and realistic. She literally says about Jane that she sees the good in everyone. It doesn't want to see their faults. You also meet a character named Sir William Lucas. Darcy, when asked about Elizabeth, which Elizabeth overhears this, he says, she seems tolerable. But what I find interesting, because I try to pay attention to little small things to Mr. Darcy in those early sections, is that he says that Elizabeth was tolerable, but he did. And it's again, not emphasized at all, but read the text. In that opening section, Mr. Darcy chooses to sit nearby Elizabeth for almost a half hour. He didn't have to do that. He could have sat anywhere, but he chose to sit by her. So for someone who says she's only tolerable, he sure found an excuse to be nearby her for a significant amount of time. So I just think that's interesting. One thing they don't really emphasize on, but it is really, it's a superficial thing, but it's something that could be built upon, which I like, is that something we learn pretty early on, is that both Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth really like to read. Like, not even just for education or information, they enjoy reading for reading's sake. They both enjoy that, which is something, I mean, that's a lot of times when you're going on a first date with somebody, right? You talk about the superficial shit, like, what's your favorite color? Do you like to read? Do you like video games? Actually, you would never say, do you like video games to a woman? Or you can, do you like video games? Do you like this? Do you like, all the boring stuff, not none of the deep things on a first date do you typically ask. But, that is something there, that is a commonality that they have between one another. We go to page 39, but since this was not my book, I have to actually scroll to it. To page 39. Sorry, give me just a moment. 39. Right. Okay. All right. Sorry. Oh, certainly, cried his faithful assistant. No one can be really esteemed accomplished who does not greatly surpass what is usually met with. A woman must have a thorough knowledge of music, singing, drawing, dancing, and the modern languages to deserve the world. And besides all this, she must possess a certain something in her air and manner of walking the tone of her voice, her address and expressions, or the word will be but half deserved. All this she must possess, added Darcy, and to all this she must yet add something more substantial in the improvement of her mind by extensive reading. Elizabeth responds with, I am no longer surprised at your knowing only 6 accomplished women. I rather wonder now at your knowing any. Which he replies, which I thought was such a zinger reply. And I was like, little teenage girl me. I was like, I don't know. I don't know why I liked it so much. I just like the smart little snappy retort back. He goes, are you so severe upon your own sex as to doubt the probability of all this? Basically saying, like, are you so low opinionated about your own gender that you can't imagine a woman being able to do all those things? That's my standard. But are you saying no woman can accomplish that standard? That seems pretty low for you to say that about your own gender. And I just thought that was, I just love the banter there. I thought it was incredible. And then the next thing is on page 44. Frick. Hold on. So much easier when you have a phone out. And so ended his affection, says Elizabeth impatiently. There has been many a one, I fancy, overcome the same way. I wonder who first discovered the efficacy of poetry in driving away love. I have been used to consider poetry as the food of love, said Darcy. Of a fine stout, healthy love it may, everything nourishes what is strong already. But if it only be a slight, thin sort of inclination, I'm convinced that one good sonnet will starve it entirely away. Darcy only smiled. There's a lot of little bits like that with Darcy, where he doesn't really say anything. It's just really, and that's why I think a lot of movie and TV stuff that works, because a lot of it's just in little facial expressions that he does. It's little subtle things. He doesn't directly state anything. But when Elizabeth goes into little smart tangents where she's just being smart and witty and funny, and she's just kind of mouthing off, a lot of times Mr. Darcy won't even he'll just kind of go I love that. I love it. I don't know. Something about it. I don't know. That stuff makes me happy. I don't know. Anyway, what else we got here? Darcy and resentment, and it told me to go to page 56, or I told me to go to page 56 to 57, so give me a second. I'm just such a bad reviewer. 57, what was it, 57? There we go, yeah. No, said Darcy, I have made no such pretension. I have faults enough, but they are not, I hope, of understanding. My temper I dare not vouch for. It is, I believe, too little yielding, certainly too little for the convenience of the world. I cannot forget the follies and vices of others so soon as I ought. Not their offences against myself. My feelings are not puffed about with every attempt to move them. My temper would perhaps be called resentful. My good opinion once lost is lost forever. That is a failing indeed, cried Elizabeth. Implacable resentment is a shade in a character, but you have chosen your fault well. I really cannot laugh at it. You are safe from me. There is, I believe, in every disposition a tendency to some particular evil, a natural defect, which not even the best education can overcome. And your defect is a propensity to hate everybody? And yours, he replied with a smile, is willfully to misunderstand them. Wow. Good stuff. Good stuff. Move on. Mr. Collins' letter. This is when he basically states that he has been working for this lady named Lady Catherine, and how he's not going to be a rich, super wealthy man, but he's going to be a fairly okay, well-off man, and he's willing to share that with his family by marrying one of them, possibly. So we have this whole thing with Wickham and Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy. So Mr. Wickham is a man who was adopted fairly early on, or at least taken care of by Mr. Darcy's father, because his parents died when he was young. And so Mr. Darcy Sr. promised money to Mr. Wickham. Mr. Wickham claims to Elizabeth that because this actually kind of reminded me of like a Heathcliff in the future, because I guess that book was written later, a Heathcliff and Hindley scenario from Wuthering Heights. But he claims that Mr. Darcy Sr. loved Wickham more than he loved Mr. Darcy. So Mr. Darcy, in revenge, refused to allow him payment that Sr. had promised him. So it really makes Mr. Darcy seem to be this resentful, annoying, small-minded guy. Of course, later on we would learn, and this is the spoiler section, so I imagine you've read the book already, or at least seen the film. But essentially what really happened is that, the father offered him like a couple $1,000s, or at least the equivalent of that today. And he was like, no, I want 30 grand. I want a lot more money. And Mr. Darcy was like, no, I'm not doing that. And so it was not out of any sort of malice on Mr. Darcy's part. I mean, Mr. Darcy did start to dislike him when he got really greedy, but it wasn't out of a particular resentment due to his father's situation. So, and then the dance, page 90 to 92. Let me get to it. 90 to 92. I stopped writing a bunch of notes down the further we got into the book, but this is also in the movie. But I stopped writing notes as we got further in, but at least in terms of specific quotes in the book, because they're just, I'm gonna be honest, the volume 2 and volume 3 to me had a lot less quotable moments than the first part did. So I don't know, but so Mr. Darcy asks Elizabeth to go dance with him. They've met up again. This is later on. There's also another thing where we get a lot of time jumps in this book, or we go a couple months by. Or in the movies, right, or in that movie 2005 one, we kind of just speed past that, whereas we're kind of just dawdling in these in-between sections until we get to the more interesting parts. Not that it was bad, but it was I'm glad that some of these things were just kind of skipped over in the movie. Anyway, but so yeah, some time has passed, but they have met up again at this other thing. So they're dancing. And she goes, it's your turn to say something now, Mr. Darcy. I talked about the dance, and you ought to make some kind of remark on the size of the room or the number of couples. He smiled and assured her that whatever she wished him to say would be said. Very well, that reply will do for the present. Perhaps by and by I may observe that private balls are much pleasanter than public ones, but now we may be silent. Do you talk by rule, then, while you are dancing? Sometimes one must speak a little, It would look odd to be entirely silent for half an hour together, and yet for the advantage of some, conversation ought to be so arranged as that they may have the trouble of saying as little as possible. Are you consulting your own feelings in the present case, or do you imagine that you are gratifying mine? Both, replied Elizabeth archly, for I have always seen a great similarity in the turn of our minds. We are each of an unsocial, taciturn disposition, unwilling to speak, unless we expect to say something that will amaze the whole room and be handed down to posterity with all the elat of a proverb. This is no very striking resemblance of your own character, I'm sure, said he. How near it may be mine, I cannot pretend to say. You think it is a faithful portrait, undoubtedly? I must not decide on my own performance. He made no answer, and they were again silent till they had gone down the dance. When he asked her if she and her sisters did not very often talk to Meryton, she answered in the affirmative, and and able to resist the temptation, added, "When you meet us there the other day, we had just been forming a new acquaintance." And then moving on to the other page. Books. Oh no, I'm sure we never read the same, or not with the same feelings. Mr. Darcy, I'm sorry you think so. But if that be the case, there can be at least be no wanted subject. We may compare our different opinions. No, I cannot talk of books in a ballroom. My head is always full of something else. The present always occupies you in such scenes, does it? Said he looked with a look of doubt. Yes, always, she replied without knowing what she said. For her thoughts had wandered far from the subject as soon afterward appeared by her suddenly exclaiming, "I remember hearing you once say, Mr. Darcy, that you hardly ever forgave, that your resentment once created was unappeasable. You are very cautious, I suppose, as to its being created." "I am," said he with a firm voice. "And never allow yourself to be blinded by prejudice?" "I hope not. It is particularly incumbent on those who never change their opinion to be sure of judging properly at first. May I ask to what these questions tend?" "Merely to illustration of your character," said she, endeavoring to shake off her gravity. "I am trying to make it out." "And what is your success?" She shook her head. "I do not get on at all. I hear such different accounts of you as puzzles me exceedingly." "I can readily believe," answered he gravely, "that reports may vary greatly with respect to me, and I could wish, Miss Bennet, that you were not to sketch my character at the present moment, as there is reason to fear that the performance would reflect no credit on either. But if I do not take your likeness now, I may never have another opportunity." "I would by no means suspend any pleasure of yours," he coldly replied. Some good stuff. So then, later on, move ahead a bit, Mr. Collins shows up. Wants to marry the eldest daughter, but she's trying to marry Mr. Binley. So he goes after Elizabeth and professes his love to her. And she says no. And this guy goes, "I know, woman. You're just playing hard to get. Okay, I'll come back later and ask you." And she goes, "No, I don't want to be with you. Don't ask me further." But it ends up working out later on, I guess, for her friend, Charlotte, who accepts a marriage to Mr. Collins. So, of course, this is also where her mother gets very mad at her, says, like, "If you do not marry Mr. Collins, I'm never talking to you again." And then her father says, "If you do marry Mr. Collins, I will never talk to you again," because he doesn't like their family member, I guess, Mr. Collins. We move on to volume 2. And I really didn't write that much down here. We go to page 185 real quick. Let me jump ahead to that. 185. Sorry, guys. Apologies. 185. That was only a small part, I guess. "In vain have I struggled. It will not do. My feelings will not be repressed. You must allow me to tell you how ardently I admire and love you." This is when Mr. Darcy expresses his love, I suppose. But I loved that little section there. Oh, and then I have to go to page 188 to 189. I'm sorry. Okay. Let's see. "You could not have made me the offer of your hand in any possible way that would have tempted me to accept it." Again, his astonishment was obvious, and he looked at her with an expression of mingled incredulity and mortification. She went on, "From the very beginning, from the first moment, I may almost say of my..." Okay, so this is also like a big moment from the movie, which I did not rewatch the movie until after I read the book, which I was a very little child when I watched the movie, so I did not have this ingrained in my memory. But I like this section so much, and then I watched it in the movie, and like, I get why I like this section so much. Anyway, so she goes in a rant. "From the very beginning, from the very first moment, I may almost say of my acquaintance with you, your manners impressing me with the fullest belief of your arrogance, your conceit, and your selfish disdain of the feelings of others were such as to form that groundwork of disprobation on which succeeding events have to build so immovable a dislike, and I had not known you a month before, I felt that you were the last man in the world whom I could ever be prevailed on to marry. You have said quite enough, madam. I perfectly comprehend your feelings, and have now only to be ashamed of what my own have been. Forgive me for having taken up so much of your time, and accept my best wishes for your health and happiness." So that hit pretty hard in the book, won't lie. However, watching that same scene in the movie, even as a guy, I can't help but be like, oh my gosh. But also maybe I'm just too much of a little softy soft. Probably am. You know, the amount of times I have been called one of the girls by friends is quite crazy. And I don't know if that's demeaning or not. Maybe. Maybe I'm just in touch with my feelings. I don't know. Actually, I think I had a coworker who told me, um, uh, mileage may vary on how you feel about the sentence itself, but she goes, men ain't shite. Except for gay men and Alex. Which I'm not gay, so I'm not part of the gay men. I'm my own separate category? Am I a man? I don't know. But that was something somebody said about me once, so I thought it was funny. Anyway, moving on, we have Darcy's letter, which kind of tries to explain himself and his motivations and everything, and doesn't necessarily ask for an apology or anything. He's just trying to make sure everything is laid plain and bare. And that was a really good section too. I enjoyed reading that. And then we move on to volume 3, where everything kind of gets resolved and packed up here. Wickham, of course, we learn after Darcy's letter the truth, as I discussed earlier, what was really going on there. And just that whole letter just basically unravels everything Elizabeth had thought about Mr. Darcy at the time, and Wickham, and a lot of other people. But Wickham actually goes on to marry Jane, you know, Elizabeth's sister. And later on, Miss Catherine deliberately tells... Oh, I completely skipped over it. There's a lot of things that happen in the book. Like, there was a dinner with Miss Catherine earlier. She was a character. That's fine. I don't know. A lot of that was, you know, a lot of the social commentary on how Catherine's a bit richer than these other characters, and she will fruitlessly spend her money on frivolous things, like her carriages have to look especially nice, and you know, everything has to look nice, and she has to waste her money on these things that ultimately don't matter. And there's that commentary there if you want to look for it. Again, we're so far removed from the 1800s that it doesn't really, I don't know. I mean, you could still apply that to today with how people have to buy the super nice cars or the super Gucci clothes or this or that. Like, it really matters when in the end you will be dust. You came from dust, you shall return to dust. What is the point of looking so extravagant in the end when it will all be striving after wind in the end? But, so there is a bit of that commentary there earlier on that I didn't talk on. There's a lot throughout the book. There's a lot of moments like that. It's just not stuff that I particularly care to talk about because it's been talked about to death in classes, and I have nothing new to add there. So, but anyway, so later on in volume 3, Elizabeth is talking to Lady Catherine, and she specifically forbids her from marrying Mr. Darcy when she never inherently planned on marrying Mr. Darcy, and she was, but I mean, she, at this point, her mind has been changed on Mr. Darcy's person. Mr. Darcy, since giving that letter, though, has not bothered her once, has respected her privacy, her wishes. Unless she comes to him, he's not going to bother again. He left his cards on the table with the letter. It's up to her from that point if she wants to pursue anything or even talk to him again. He's been respectful and stayed away. So, but there are, you know, a lot of people kind of get the hint that he does like her. So Miss Catherine says, like, no, he needs, also Miss Catherine is Mr. Darcy's aunt, which is something I forgot to mention. But anyway, she's been setting up since childhood for basically Mr. Darcy to marry his cousin, which, one, ill. It was also ill with Mr. Collins, but also ill with this. And so, you know, they'll be financially stable together and yada, 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 it'll be good. And she's like, well, I never inherently planned on marrying him, but it's not your say to tell me what I can or can't do in case I wanted to. And then, of course, by the end, she does get engaged to Mr. Darcy, which by and large saves, you know, her and her family in terms of the financial situation, because Mr. Darcy's fairly well off, his sister even more so, but he's pretty well off himself. And of course, you know, they will seemingly be happy because they challenge each other. You know, ultimately what Mr. Darcy fell in love with her with wasn't the fact that she was pretty. she was agreeable. No, I mean, she's a pretty girl. But, I mean, actually in the book, they don't describe her particularly one way or the other. But I am imagining her as Keira Knightley, so of course she is. But it's not because she's pretty. It's her wit, it's her intelligence, it's her person, it's her being itself that he loves, that he appreciates, that made her stand out. So, you know, I'm sure they will continue to challenge each other and live a happy and prosperous life. We can hope so. But, you know, everything kind of works out. Wickham is given money by Mr. Darcy, so hopefully he'll use that wisely and provide for him and Jane. And that's ultimately the end. You know, there's a happily ever after, I suppose. And then we go to page 3. Was it 59? Was it? I think so. 359. Was it 359? Yes. How could you begin? She said. I can comprehend your going on charmingly when you had once made a beginning, but what could set you off in the first place? I cannot fix on the hour, the spot, or the look, or the words which laid the foundation. It is too long ago. I was in the middle before I knew that I had begun. Because she's asking about when he specifically fell in love with her. My beauty you had early withstood, and as for my manners, my behavior to you was at least always bordering on the uncivil, and I never spoke to you without rather wishing to give you pain than not. Now be sincere. Did you admire me for my impertinence? For the liveliness of your mind, I did. You may as well call it impertinence at once. It was very little less. The fact is that you were sick of civility, of deference, of officious attention. You were disgusted with the women who were always speaking and looking and thinking for your approbation alone. I roused and interested you because I was so unlike them. Had you not been really amiable, you would have hated me for it, but in spite of the pains you took to disguise yourself, your feelings were always noble and just, and in your heart you thoroughly despised the persons who so assiduously courted you. There I have saved you the trouble of accounting for it, and really, all things considered, I begin to think it perfectly reasonable. To be sure, you knew no actual good of me, but nobody thinks of that when they fall in love. And, like I said, basically happily ever after. A lot more can be said about this book, a lot more has been said about this book, but these are overall my thoughts. I enjoy the book quite a bit. Not my favorite book. If I read all the Jane Austen novels, we'll see if this remains my favorite. I hope not, because I like the book. I don't love the book. And I would love for one of these Jane Austen books for me to absolutely love and adore. So hopefully that will be down the line when I read more Jane Austen works. I'll find my favorite amongst the bunch. But it's a solid work. There's a reason people still talk about it to this day. Definitely worth your time to at least check out once. I mean, it's not about being pretentious or anything like that. It's just like, you can be a fantasy reader, you can be a sci-fi reader, you know, but if you're going to be just a reader, typically, I mean, you should probably have this somewhere on the bucket list just to, you know, it comes up in conversation even to this day, just this novel. So it'd be a good thing to say, like, yeah, I actually know. I read it. I do know. You know, whether you like it or you don't like it, you can form an actual opinion. Because watching a movie is not a way to have an actual opinion on the book. You have to actually read it. Because, you know, same thing with everything. Like, as long as you've read something or you've watched something or you've played something, you are entitled to an opinion. If you don't, personally, I know in booktube a lot of days, it's the DNFing books and all this stuff. But if you DNF a book, I really feel like you don't have a right to say you don't like it. Or that you do like it. Because you didn't finish it. You didn't earn it, you know. So the opinion is earned when the time spent has been endured. Anyway, Pride and Prejudice. I am glad I read this. Am I going to be chomping at the bit to read this immediately soon again in the near future? Probably not. But I'm glad I read this, and I'm sure in another decade or so, just like with Cervantes, with Don Quixote, I'll be chomping at the bit to read this again, and hopefully in my 30s acquire something new from it. Like, this is one of the novels like I want to read the older I get to see the differences I may feel, you know, maybe you read this in high school and you didn't enjoy it. Same with me when I read William Shakespeare, but then I'm reading William Shakespeare in my 20s, and after I've fallen in love with reading in general, and it's bliss. It is, I chomp at the bit for it, right? And I'm interested to see how I'll feel about Moby Dick reading it as an adult. I enjoyed this as a 20-year-old. Maybe at 30 or 40, I will adore it. I don't know. We'll find out, though. But this is a book I will come back to. Maybe I will do it every 10 years. Just to see the progress of who I am as a person and to see how my tastes have changed. Anyway, guys, until next time, live long and prosper.